All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Aakash. Let me just introduce myself really quick so you know who I am. I actually got into tech just a little over 20 years ago because I stumbled across some open source code. I started playing around with it, not knowing how to code or do anything, but I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Maybe I can try to manipulate it and do something with it. And that kind of started my tech, started working in open source, started building some of my own services over time. And I also was a victim to probably hundreds of SQL injections on a monthly basis because I did not know what I was doing. But all I did was I was like, it's okay, I have a backup. I'll just take this one down and re-upload it, and the problem came back tomorrow, right? But I didn't know what to do. That's how I learned. I experimented, learned about new things, met new friends, came to conferences, right? Got to talk to other people and learn how to do things better. Just some other things about me. I do love to travel and I go hiking to a lot of great places. I think the Alps and I'm going to say the Amazon are my two favorite spots that I've enjoyed. I highly recommend you go there. My wife and I go to about 2 countries a year now. It was 4 before COVID. We're trying to bring it back to 4 next year. We've got 3 planned out. I can tell you more about that over drinks later. And the final thing I'll share is we used to foster puppies. You'll see Scarlett and Dexter up there. We actually adopted them when we got them. We saw the post on Nextdoor. No one really took them in, so we took them in. And we saw that they were completely traumatized. They didn't really want to be in an environment, an ecosystem, I would say, filled with human beings. We scare them. So we decided to adopt them at that point instead of putting them through the trauma of going to another house and work with them until now, still a few years later, to get more comfortable. You know, they're happy in their own neighborhood. They're happy when we go a few other places. If I take them to a city, they'll probably freak out, and things like that. Final fun fact, I love to stargaze and planet stalk. Whenever there's a solar eclipse or there's something fun going on, I'm outside with all of my telescopes, even if it's in the middle of the day, taking a look and enjoying that view. So as we go through this, I got a few quick expectations. First, please stay engaged. What this talks about is really muting your phone, making sure there are no distractions for your peers as we go through today's conversation. And then 2, I want to reflect on what you see here. I started my career as an engineer, and I probably spent the first decade wondering why the hell no one listens to me and why the health of our product is so crappy, right? And it took me a while to realize I didn't have to understand the health of the product. I didn't have to be the one working in the code. I have to be the person who had to know how to communicate it, right? And so really think about what I'm going to share today and hopefully can take it back to solve some of your own challenges as you go forward. And again, practice psychological safety. You're at a conference. I encourage you to talk to other people here, share notes, trade ideas, take something back to try and go from there. But also recognize you might hear some things and you're like, hey, that doesn't make sense. I wouldn't do that. But that's okay. We all have different backgrounds, different contexts, different experiences. So just be mindful of that. Now, in terms of key learning goals, identify the impact tech debt, learn to explain it using storytelling, see how it improves collaboration with business, product, and engineering as we work through that. And you really want to focus on creating services that deliver value at the end of the day. I can't tell you the number of years I spent working 80 or 100-hour weeks just to get one small thing fixed when there's much more interesting features we could be building. But again, the weight of the system slowing us down, unfortunately, right? So just realize nothing comes easy, including building a high quality product engineering culture. In fact, it's really hard to get there, but in my opinion, it's very easy to stay there, right? Once you start doing all the right things. So before we get started, I'd like to get some folks to volunteer. In your definition, how would you describe tech debt? Just feel free to shout out. Stuff that makes you slow. What else? Something from the old guy. Jerry wrote it 30 years ago, and we're not going to touch it, right? Making a decision to move quickly today that you know is going to cause maintenance tomorrow. Yes. Choosing an indoctrinated tool that you think is going to pan out, but it ends up dying. Okay. All great examples, right? Put it simply, code that doesn't scale. It was hacked together without end-to-end visibility. But as an engineer, I like the last one. This is my favorite way of describing stuff I've done. It's just really bad code, right? We knew it was bad when we wrote it. We knew it was bad when we looked at it later. And we just decided to move on because there were pressures from other directions and we don't want to deal with it, right? We accepted the debt until we have to deal with tomorrow. And so I asked, well, how do we get there? What causes this to happen? As I started my career, I started open source. I started working small. I worked with small companies at first, but then from that, I built a network, got exposed to work with some larger organizations. And I realized that there wasn't really much of an appetite for tech debt because we have these delivery factories and we have to move fast and we have to get these things done and out the door, right? But when you look at some of these organizations from the outside, their products look great. You look behind the scenes and you see, I'm going to say spaghetti sticks and duct tape and whatever else you want to call it, holding everything up, right? And so when I look at what's happening there, we have complex, fragile legacy systems, high code coupling, inconsistent environments, poor dependency testing. The list goes on, right? And whoops, I don't know how we jumped there. And there's a list of things we're not doing that we know we should be doing. And if I were to describe visually what that looks like, we've got the latest shiny feature we're always chasing. We always have to finish by tomorrow because it was due yesterday. And then there's everything else being crushed by the weight of the system, and the quality isn't that great. And we're always told, that's not really a big deal yet. We'll come back to that later. And when we come back to it later, we hear the exact same thing over and over and over again, right? And so as part of that, what I want you to do is build a foundation for your story and think about how you use metrics. When I started as an engineer, my attitude was just tell me what you want me to code and I'll go write it, right? But I wasn't that great at explaining to people why the thing they're asking me to do before I could do something else was going to create an issue. And so as part of that, one of the things I learned is metrics are a great way to help visualize, track, and manage a conversation, right? So sometimes you want to baseline your current product's performance, know where it is today, talk to your stakeholders, talk to your teams, understand your pains and your gains, right? And I like to say, set quarterly objectives for your product. Make them small and make them achievable at first, but I like to stick to, I'd say, hairy goals, audacious goals at the end of the day, so we can try to stretch our creativity, push the bounds of innovation, right? And then the last piece is to reflect and be honest with yourself. And this might also involve changing your KPIs. Now, one of the things I learned over time is when we start to report on these OKRs, we change the lens of the conversation. Instead of telling someone, hey, there's a problem with this other thing over here we have to go fix, I start explaining because we're not addressing this problem, it's actually delaying our ability to ship across all 12 of these teams. And that's why we're on this 12-week cycle instead of all being able to work independently on whatever cadence we want to work on, right? And that lens changes on how we approach the conversation. So that's one piece of it. The other thing I want you to think about is the story outline. You're really taking someone through a journey. You're really walking them through what's happening. You want them to not only be empathetic, but you want them to feel invested in how we go through it. So what you always want to do is you want to set the stage first. You want to talk about, what are we working towards? Like tech debt is like building a house with temporary walls that weakens over time, and it's natural, right? Try to open it in a simple way. Tell people what we're looking at for your problem. So before you dive into the problem, as an engineer, I always had a habit of forgetting step one and just going straight to the problem saying, hey, we have to go do this thing. And people look at me confused on, I don't know what you're talking about. I already got 5 other things to talk about. We're not going to discuss this right now. And I feel like I was being dismissed on an important issue, right? So we don't always want to dive into a problem. We want to hook people in by setting the stage before we introduce the problem. From there, we want to highlight the consequences. What is this problem doing for us? What are the challenges that it's creating that we're not thinking about, right? Or we think they're normal, but they're actually not normal in how we work. And from my experience, what I used to do a lot is I used to present, especially in my early days, one solution. And that solution wasn't always ideal, especially when I looked at the big picture. So what I learned to do is as you go through this, you want to talk to people offline. You want to get various perspectives and inputs, and you want to present many solutions. You want to be able to have a conversation and allow people to mold what the future looks like instead of telling them this is what it is and we have to do it, right? You want to invite them into that conversation and let them actually be honest. You might actually learn something more and you might decide to go in a different direction that's better, right? The last step is focus on the benefits. Why are you doing it? And if there's anything that doesn't tie to a benefit, maybe there's good reason not to work on it. Maybe it's not an important issue for today. Right? That's one of the things I've also learned the hard way as I've gone through this process. So when you think about the story outline, think about how you walk people through this journey and how we bring all of that together. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is actually show you an example. I worked with a global supply chain organization And over there, they have a device that they put in all of the drivers' hands globally. This device has hardware, the actual infrastructure for software, then the software itself, all being managed with about 13 different teams in this enterprise, okay? And these 13 teams cannot ship independently today because of legacy architecture they had set up. And when I started working with them, I worked with the leads for a few months, and I was stumbled on how complicated the release process was. I actually couldn't comprehend it for the first few weeks. And when I started to understand the challenges around it and how we wanted to move away from a batch system into our database and more towards independent live data streams and start decentralizing how each of the teams manage their own data, we realized that, one, there was a viable idea for a solution, but every time it was brought up in discussion with product didn't want to hear it. Product didn't have time. Product was being crushed by 10 other priorities, including the deal the CXO signed just yesterday with this other company, and they needed this other feature 2 days from now. That was the reality that they were living in, right? And so after working with them for a few months, we decided during that journey, we're actually going to sit down and write a story. We need to, one, all of us agree on as a team what it is, but then look at all the different elements in the organization and help bring them on the same journey we're on, because we're all looking at our product in different ways. So in that example, this is actually one of our slides. This is how I set the context. And we learned that we needed slides. We actually needed to paint a story and walk people through it slowly and invite them to a conversation, because we're actually talking to a lot of different senior leaders. So we said, okay, this wasn't cooked up overnight. This isn't us telling you have to do this by tomorrow, but really this is through a series of thoughtful conversations and interactions from a variety of stakeholders for a few months. And coming out of that, we had 4 key goals and learnings and how we need to deliver as an organization and how we want to operate and how we want to organize these 13 teams over here. And strategically, the first 3 bullets don't tell us anything, but those first 3 bullets solve the problem, to put it simply, right? From there, we went into talking about, well, what are these 3 things, right? You'll notice that we have another slide. Like over here, this is Aakash screaming on the inside, oh my God, there's so many slides, and this one says the exact same thing as the last one. But this is what helped with the conversation. We took a step back, we slowed it down, we let people reflect on it. And we poked at each one and we said, okay, when we say safe to ship in one sentence, what does that mean? We're going to be leveraging automation, etc., right? We're thinking about how we're going to be working smarter. We're thinking about breaking our work down. What does that mean? We can't be shipping monolithic features and expecting them tomorrow because there's a lot of dependencies. But we can think about what's necessary for a business tomorrow and how do we build up to it into the future based on what they're going to need maybe 3 months versus 6 months from now. And then there's a whole infrastructure piece and testing piece that the team was struggling with. So we put that under stabilizing the delivery runway, right? And we described it as kind of like a train going on the tracks. And if you don't have tracks to drive on, how are you navigating and managing where you're going effectively? And then from there, we closed it out. This was the end of the beginning of the discussion. We said, as we go forward and we talk about these 3 things in detail, right? I want us to review it as a team. This room had directors from the business, product, and engineering present when we're going through it, after there may be 50 micro reviews before this, right? And we agreed we're going to prioritize some of these things because we're all struggling. The business is struggling, the product is struggling, engineering is struggling. Let's acknowledge there's a problem, and we're not going to fix everything overnight. But let's pick a few things we can all agree to focus on and create time and space to focus on those activities. And we'll prioritize those in our roadmap. We don't see them on our roadmap today. Our roadmap doesn't feel pragmatic today, but we're going to address that as part of the conversation. From there, when I dive into the details, this is where I start to get analytical, and I'd say you want to pull in industry expertise. One of the things I learned as an engineer is don't rely on just your input. Use it in the conversations to influence people, but rely on outside expertise. Start pointing to as many other things as you can, but point at them methodically and sequentially and in relevance to drive the conversation. So if I want to make it safe to ship, I love pointing at the 2019 Dora report. I actually read all of them in detail every year. I think half of it's fluff, but I still read it. And I look for the small nuances. Every year, aside from their standard metrics, they actually publish some unique stuff that's truly innovative, right? Like, for example, over here, when most organizations say we can't be an elite performer because we're different and this and that, and we do things differently. Well, I like to bring up this visual and question them. I say, well, look at this. Look at our automated performance tests. Per the industry standard, The elite people are only at 28%. No one's telling you to go 100%. No one's saying 90. We're not even saying 50. We're just saying, let's make it a little bit better and set the bar a little bit higher quarter and slowly move in the right direction. For us, some of these might matter more than others because everyone's different at how they operate. I agree, you're different. But let's look at that in context and what we have to do and what does good look like. We might try to push everything out the door initially and do it manually at first because we think it's fast, but it's not fast. It's actually slower doing it that way the first time, and then it's slower to maintain it going forward. So think about how you build in the right things to support the healthier product. And so I'll use this to drive a lot of those discussions and have people look at the metrics. When people see low numbers, they're like, oh, you know what? I don't know. Why can't we do 10%? Why can't we do 15%? Right? It changes the lens of the conversation. And then the other thing I like to do, if I go back to the database problem I was describing before, I spent probably about 6 months building a relationship with this product director. And I kind of had to because she was very vocal. She would question everything she felt was not right or inappropriate or wrong because she cared about the quality of her work. She cared about doing a good job. She cared about showing up well. But what I realized was there's a disconnect in communication between the engineers and what the product director understood. She wanted to ship faster and do more, but she didn't understand why engineering couldn't do it fast enough, so it was obviously their problem. That's just mentally where she somehow got stuck, right? And so as part of that conversation, we had to sit down for a little bit and we said, how do we describe this problem to her on how having a batch system that manages all of our package flow information in one database is the reason it slows us down? And we need to start to break this down and architect this differently as we go forward. We've tried explaining it. That didn't work. We tried walking through some sort of demo. That didn't work. So we decided, well, let's just visualize it, right? You're a company where the core center of your business is moving packages. So we said, well, here's your current state of your database, right? Imagine if you had one distribution center in the middle of the country. If you're shipping something from Colorado Springs to Denver, or Denver to San Francisco, or San Francisco to Seattle, it'll always go through Kansas. Her jaw dropped when I explained it. She's like, yeah, that's not a good distribution network. I said, exactly. This is how our team shipped today. It's not a good distribution system to get code out the door, unfortunately. This is why we're stuck. And she's like, okay, I think I understand the problem you're facing. What do we do? I said, well, what we're proposing to do is to break it down, make it smaller and easier to manage, give discrete ownership to specific parts to specific teams so we can ship more autonomously, and set up negotiated permissions to share the data, among other things, versus it just being in one system and 13 people trying to modify one thing at one time, etc. And we talked through this, and she's like, okay, well, this makes complete sense to me. Why hasn't anyone said this to me before? Now, of course, the teams were explaining it to her for years, right? But in different words and in different ways than how we had approached it in this conversation, how we methodically broke it down, and how we even made it visual. I mean, this doesn't even describe the actual technical problem, but this helps mentally paint the picture on why she can't move as fast as she wants, right? And so this helped us take a step back and say, okay, we're going to agree to prioritize a few different things as we go forward. I now understand what this problem is. We now understand the importance and impact of it, because the first question the team got after this understanding is she turns to the leads and says, you told me this feature is 6 months. If you do this, how long will this take? The team says less than 1 month. She's shocked. She now starts to understand the value and why we're saying some things are going to be faster. And she understands how she's going to use that as a lever in her system to start to prioritize some of these things in the conversations. Now, some of these decks, you must be wondering, how many slides do you make? Well, I walked you through the executive summary at the top, just so you have a visual. You can kind of read it in the deck when you get it. Then we have safe to ship, breaking work down, stabilizing the delivery runway, right? So I take it step by step. Each one's a distinct component. Will they have dependencies across and where we need to coordinate? Yes. But you want to break it down and have a conversation. And we take months to pull this together sometimes because it's a series of conversations, a series of stakeholders across an organization, and they're all looking at it from a different lens. And you want to recognize those different perspectives. You have your business teams, right? They're focused on the bottom line, the ROI, being competitive in the market, and if our customers are happy so they can continue to monetize that, right? Our product team is looking on the user experience and the feature delivery. They're concerned about balancing the user needs with the business goals among other things, and how do we prioritize all this in to get it in, right? And then we think about engineering. Engineering is focused on code quality. We're looking at stability, scalability, long-term maintainability, and everything that makes a product's health reliable and trustworthy. Something that allows us to sleep at night, right? So everyone's got a different perspective, and what I want you to take away from this slide is WIFM. Who can tell me what WIFM stands for? What's in it for me? Everyone is always thinking, what's in it for me? So every time you talk to someone in one of these groups, understand where they're coming from, understand what they care about and what they probably want to hear, and focus on that part of the conversation. So when I showed you like all of those slides earlier, I don't talk and index equally on all of those with every single person I talk. Sometimes I jump around and I say, hey, based on our last conversation, I understood this. This is the impact to the overall flow and what we need to do with the team. And I focus with them on what they're going to care about so they understand their voice is being heard. And guess what? When you're in that group meeting, you're less likely to face resistance because you've met with them offline. They feel heard. They can see how you've incorporated their pieces in the approach. If anything, they might actually support you in that public meeting because they're part of that journey with you. They see their work as part of the solution. All right. So there are a few final things in terms of the art of influencing with metrics. Sorry, I don't know why that happened. So I'm going to say first one is true north. Pick numbers you care about. These numbers have to be important and they have to be relevant. I can't tell you the number of times I'm leaving a meeting and I'm just scratching my head on, okay, I'm going to be working this Excel, doing these numbers, but I know they're useless. They're just vanity metrics. They just check a box and they make someone feel good. But if you know there are other numbers that are more important, other metrics, bring them forward. Focus on those. You know, one classic example I like to share is in the 1990s, if you ever went to see the Pepsi website, if you haven't, you can check it on archive.org. You know, they had a nice, flashy website back in the day, and it was purely just for fun, obviously. And they had a counter at the bottom. And there's a story where the CIO was given an update almost on a monthly basis for a little bit on how many hits he was getting. And after a few, he interrupted. He's like, I don't want this on my update anymore. There's no value from this metric. Why do I care about the number of people on our website? And the response he got is, well, it shows how popular we are. Against what? Against who? What do they get? How does this impact our bottom line? The important questions went unanswered. So if your important questions go unanswered by your current metrics, they're not the right metrics. Just keep that in mind. So that goes back to relevant metrics. The third one I'd highly recommend is respect your resistors. The people who are probably the most unhappy or dislike the approach or the ideas or the solution the most, work very closely with them. If you can get them to work with you, and if people start seeing them as part of the journey, you started breaking down some of the hardest barriers to change of influencing in your organization. They also tend to appreciate being pulled in first, FYI. So be brave. It's going to probably feel uncomfortable. I feel scared half the time because these people yell at me, just so you know. So it's okay. Just be brave. Have a conversation. If it doesn't go well, have a drink afterwards or whatever you need to do and try again later, right? There's also time and setting sometimes. And last piece is recognize journeys. Everyone is on a journey. Think about yourself and how you've grown through your career. Everyone else is also growing through their career, right? So try to minimize any biases. And with that, we're going to share a short video from a prep cook. And I love how he breaks down the concept of tech debt and how we can think about addressing it proactively in the work that you do.
So I learned to cook in a restaurant. I was a prep cook, and I swear this video is about code. So every morning I stared down a stack of produce that I had to wash, slice, chop, dice, and shred all before the lunch rush started. Speed mattered. If it wasn't done in time, I slipped down every. So I'd chop, and the pile would grow, scraps would get all over the place, the veggies would be mixed, there'd be onions stuck to the peppers. And the worst part of all of this is I was still slow. But I was lucky, because instead of just firing me, my coworkers decided to train me. And what they taught me was to clean as you go. So as you're cutting, move the scraps to the bin. Once you're done, use a bench scraper to get everything off the cutting board and then take a little rag and wipe it down to reset back to 0 before you start the next bed sheet. Now, I was not on board with this. I mean, I was barely getting everything done without adding extra cleaning work. So how the hell was this going to make me more effective? But I had two options. One, I could do it their way. Two, I can get fired. So I decided to give it a try. And a couple things happened. The quality of my work, and I wasn't dealing with a cluttered mess, so I could see what I was doing. My speed went up as well because I wasn't trying to work around past messes. I could just go in and get the work done. Finally, starting with a clean station meant that each time when I wiped down, it was as fast as it was the first time. My messes never got out of hand. After I made this change, I wasn't rushing to get done. And instead of being horrified by my work, the cooks started offering me new training opportunities. I didn't want to believe it, but learning to clean as I go made me both better and faster at the job. So what does all this have to do with code? Before I get to that, have you subscribed yet? Hit that button. In a code base, we're always making small messes as we work. We're solving new problems, and that means our code is full of educated guesses that are mostly correct, but we don't know what the final solution is yet. If we don't clean as we go, each feature leaves a small mess. Those are the scraps that we create as we hone the idea into working code. And if we let those messes build up, we find ourselves pitted against the rest of the company. We advocate for prioritizing tech debt cleanup, but the time we set aside inevitably gets chipped away until there's no time left to clean, and so the mess continues to grow. When we get caught in this spiral, there are only two ways out of it that I've seen. One, your team just accepts that this is what life is like now, and you work on a messy beast of an app forever. Or two, the mess reaches critical mass, and you're forced to rebuild just to escape the tech debt of the original app. And no matter how it shakes out, you're guaranteed to be slowed down by the mess in the code base. Great. But what happens if we clean as we go in our code base instead? Let me show you what I mean. If we take a little bit of extra time to refactor as part of our pull request, we can handle small messes before they can pile up into big ones. Sneaking a little bit of cleaning into every pull request helps avoid the worst of the tech debt. And it means we don't have to take on the doomed task of trying to prioritize cleaning up tech debt over new features. Now, cleaning as you go is a habit that needs to be built. It requires adjusting your team culture, and it's far from easy. But it's a habit that's well worth building because it's going to make your work better, it's going to make it faster, and it's going to save you a ton of frustration in the long run. Whether you're in the kitchen or in the code base. I make videos like these every week, so make sure that you subscribe and maybe even join the Discord so that you can keep up with everything that I put out. And make sure to watch this one next because, to be honest, it looks like a banger.
Imagine being able to build an app with your...
All right, thank you. So, I really like how they use the analogy of cooking. That's actually changed the way I cook a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little bit more organized in my prep, and it actually does make a big difference. So I'd recommend it. And so, as you think about your journey, I'm going to give you some tools from my playbook. These are things I think about strategically, right? I've walked you through many different things, but if you need to take a step back and you're like, okay, well, what's step one? What do I try? I'd say these are 4 rocks to look under, right? First, build a ways of working strategy, enabling ownership. You want to enable your teams, not handcuff them, right? So if they're handcuffed today, see what we can do to address it to make things more safe for them to ship, right? I say conduct product or application health assessments periodically. Try to automate these as much as possible too. I mean, your product communicates clearly to you every time it goes down, every time it is slow, every time it's making your users unhappy. It's moaning and groaning and telling you something. Record all of those interactions, right? Be intentional in your tech solution strategy, meaning you may have signed a great big deal today, but if you're going to hack through something tomorrow, are you going to be able to keep that deal, right? Those are other questions you should probably think about answering other than the ones we hear when we hear about some of these solutions, right? And then automate the nuance and the mundane. If you want your team to be productive, think about how you work smart, right? A lot of folks continuously do the same thing, like, for example, prepare environments before they begin work. You can actually automate a lot of that as one example, among other things. So final thing for everyone here, please take advantage of the network at this conference. Talk to people, share notes, right? You might want to continue a conversation after today as you learn something or try something new. And if you want to connect with me afterwards, you can reach out or connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So before you run away, let's see if we've got any questions. Questions? Nobody's got any questions at all today? All right.
I'll go back to you.
Please don't be hard.
So what's the rocket equation?
Sorry?
I said, what's the rocket equation? You asked for it not to be hard. Sorry, it's fine. So I have an incredibly talented engineer on my team, right? Like, fundamentally just an excellent engineer who cannot communicate business value out of his work for crap and cannot give me estimates worth a damn. What conversation should I be having with him to help him get to the point where I can help him prioritize his work?
Sure. So there are a few different ways to handle it, right? I think the first time I was forced into the conversation is when I wanted to move to the next level of my career. And people told me why they thought I was unprepared, even though I was very good at what I did. And that forced me to take a harsh reflection. And so I'd say as part of just performance management, one example, I would have just goal settings and soft skill building as a requirement. I've noticed that works really well. I've noticed that some of the big firms have that as just a general requirement. And that's why their folks might develop a little bit faster sometimes, because they're looking at that human holistically. They're not just saying, I hired you to code, right? And so I think about it from that perspective. I'd also have a conversation with them. Like, if they're completely against it, there might be a reason why. Try to find out what's bothering them, how we can help them. There might be something underlying we can address. I've seen some people most people I've seen refuse to do something because they want to avoid a confrontation, from my experience. That's like the true underlying issues, either someone on the team or their manager, someone on another team, or things like that. So have the conversation, maybe give them some time if they don't tell you immediately, but that's what I'd recommend.
All right.
I really like what we're talking about when it comes to how you approach resistors. Now, when it comes to domain guarders, well, I'll just call them that, somebody who wants to hold on to their domain or feels like, I work with many different parts of the business, including PDE to business systems. You have a lot of people who try to protect their domain for one reason or another and become very reactive when you attempt to either reach into their domain, try to integrate within there, and even if you try to reach out to them as one of the resistors early on, which is something I learned as well. But what is your advice for, say, approaching these type of environments where the domain guarding, you would call it almost subtext. The person isn't being overt about it, but you can tell that if it goes too far, it might become reactive or something of that sort, when you're in these kind of delicate, soft touch situations.
Sure. So I think I hear two issues, honestly. I think one, there's a culture issue, right? And I think over time, people become protective to feel like they stay relevant or other reasons, whatever they are. But I think there's also a strategy gap other than culture, meaning the leaders need to be aligned, that they all support capabilities in different ways, and they're all going to have to work together. That's going to involve them reaching across to coordinate, and not always formally at the top level, because not everything's solved at that level, right? And so a lot of times what I've learned from my experience, especially like in working some banks and some other industries, sometimes leaders have bad experience and then they stop talking to each other. Some of these people actually don't even get into the same room for years. And, I have to host a happy hour or something just to get them all together and start talking again, right? It's a little weird. But that's where you have to realize that, as we talked about earlier, you need to push ownership down. You need to let the people doing the work make the judgment call. You need to allow another engineer from your organization reach out to an engineer in your organization and agree, yes, there's a dependency. We have to do something to reach this other strategic goal that we've committed to at a high level. So this interaction's okay. If you want us to track it in Jira and prioritize it, fine. We'll go and do that. But we need to allow that interaction and allow that type of ownership in order for people to move. Otherwise, what do you see? You see, well, okay, this engineer slided to their manager. Now it's on to the senior manager. Now it's on to the director. Now the director's going to go talk. There's a whole delay cycle being introduced just by having that hierarchy and trying to keep things rigid. So I think ownership is going to be key. And I think your problem is culture and strategy together and getting them work together, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's give it up one more time for Aakash.